Hello and a very warm welcome to a special show on enabling financial inclusion through efficient remittances, digitization and demonetization, brought to you by CNBC TV18 and Western Union. In this very special episode, we focus on remittances and their impact on financial inclusion and development in India. To put things in perspectives, here are a few statistics. According to the World Bank, India is currently the largest recipient of international remittances in the world. Remittances from Indian working overseas stood at close to $70 billion as of 2015. In other words, these remittances amount to about 4% of India's GDP, and on an average, about 4.5% of the total households in India regularly receive these remittances. So does the remitted money even find its way into the formal channel? Does it translate into more financial inclusion? How do remittances impact the socio-economic well-being of people? And to what extent is it alleviating poverty? And also the impact the government's note ban will have on this entire industry. To answer these questions and to better understand the impact of remittances on the economy and on financial inclusion specifically, we are joined by an expert panel today. Sohini Rajola, MD and RVP India and Asia Western Union, Rajeev Arora, COO of Fino Paytech, and Janme Jayasidha, Chairman Asia Pacific at the Boston Consulting Group. Welcome to the show, everyone. Sohini, let me start with you because, you really authored that report that we're going to be discussing through this entire panel. What were some of the key highlights you've got out of that report you've just done?
Very interestingly, there were two key things that came out. One is the impact which is on the financial aspects, and it is interesting that whether it is the penetration of bank accounts, the usage of bank accounts, the ease with which these people can get access to credit because of the fact that they get regular inflows into their accounts, or the percentage of women who have bank accounts was much greater in states and regions and also populations, segments of populations which were receiving remittances. The other and more interesting thing that came out was the impact that this has on the social parameters. For example, health indicators in terms of infant mortality rates, or in terms of the impact that women have or the operations that women do on bank accounts. And we found that all of that was also better for remittance receiving states and in remittance receiving families in a similar environment.
Could you also tell us how you conducted, what was the methodology for this survey, what was the sample size used?
Yeah, so fundamentally we used Edelman Research, our agency, to conduct this research. They went ahead and did a lot of secondary research. They looked at a lot of data from a whole lot of sources and came up with the fact finding and the quantitative aspects. They also went around and then interviewed a segment of our customers to actually get the stories from them. So they came out with about more than 50 odd stories from customers saying what is the impact that remittances has had on their lives, and those were more of these stories which were corroborating the social factors.
We'll get you to tell us some of those stories, but Mr. Sinha, from your experience, what has the empirical evidence been of remittances coming in? How much have they aided financial inclusion? I mean, how do they lead to an individual opening a bank account? Does it precede remittances coming in, or does it follow?
Well, it depends on the channel by which they come and how they are used, right? If you get enough money to just be able, that you need it instantly to spend, then you don't put it into a bank. But, financial inclusion is a factor of 5 things, right? You need to save, you need to invest, you need to borrow, you need to insure, and you need to remit, right?
Yeah.
And remittances for a lot of these people, wherever there is migrants and wherever there are people working outside their hometown with their families in a different place, they need to be able to send them money.
The end use of the money that is remitted.
Correct.
Mr. Arora, you're in the process, Fino's in the process of setting up a payments bank. Tell us about the domestic experience you've had, because, right now we're talking about international remittances. Domestically, what have you seen? What has been the trend so far? And do you, again, the same question to you, how much of an impact have you seen remittances really, even across the country for that matter? A farmer from Bihar sending money to his family back home in Orissa, for instance. How much of an impact has that had on financial inclusion?
Remittance by itself is including people financially, if they can send or receive money. That's point one. The second is, wherever we see remittance going, those are territories which have had lower per capita GDP, and they had more poverty, if I may use the term, because of which people were forced to look for livelihood outside. Some of these people migrated to urban India, some of these people migrated overseas. And that is the money which is coming in. And when you go back and look at the economic impact that external revenue has had on those geographies, that is clearly evident.
Tell us more about that existing infrastructure that is already there to enable these transactions to happen. You said, is that something that is lacking? Is that not aiding remittances in, helping financial inclusion to a large extent?
No, so, I consider Western Union also a formal channel. So if you really look at the formal channel, the other formal channel which exists is banks.
Yeah.
With the PMJDY, they walked that extra mile to ensure that every village in the country has a financial outlet to service those transactions. So I think the capacity does exist, but this channel is not, the extended channel is not able to service all the products.
So, would you want to add to that, since your research is on aiding financial inclusion?
Yeah, so I think the parameters of financial inclusion, fundamentally the remittance itself, the fact that there is a formal transfer of money into a formal channel, whether it's a banking or through a money transfer operator, is indeed getting remittances. Now, most of the money might go towards family maintenance, but it automatically, and those were the two things that we found there, which was one is the greater access to bank accounts, them having more bank accounts, keeping more deposits, even if it is smaller amounts, and then because there is a regular receipt of money, it automatically creates some history and is easier for them to get access to credit from a bank rather than just go to a money lender.
So do you think that is helping Jan Dhan accounts, for instance, which are zero balance so far? Could that help Jan Dhan accounts be used more efficiently?
So whether it is Jan Dhan accounts or even an NRE account, it really doesn't matter. It is the choice of the customer. As long as there is an account in which the customer can receive money and he chooses to receive money into that account, or if he wants to take out cash, whatever method that the customer wants, we have to be able to enable the remittances.
Since we're talking about financial inclusion here, and Jan Dhan accounts specifically, Dr. Sinha, how strong a linkage do you see between effective use of Jan Dhan accounts, for that matter, even getting credit facilities and remittances?
Look, I don't think remittances and Jan Dhan account, the correlation there has to be drawn to be very strong, right? Jan Dhan account is part of a really dynamic and forward-looking movement by this government, where they are trying to open accounts, give people the Aadhaar identity, and link it with a mobile phone.
Yeah.
What they call the Jam Trinity.
Yeah.
Which actually has a lot of power in it, right? Remittances, $70 billion is like 3.6% of our GDP.
Yeah.
They're actually pretty important for our current account. They are pretty important, they are almost double the amount of subsidies that we put in, right? So it's a very important source.
On that note, we will take a very short break, but on the other side, we discuss how demonetization and digitization have impacted the remittances industry. Welcome back. You're watching a very special show presented by Western Union and CNBC TV18, enabling financial inclusion through efficient remittances. Rajeev, coming to you again, since you're more clued into the domestic remittances, how much of an opportunity has demonetization presented to payment players like you? Just stepping away from remittances for a bit, and I'll come back to it. But could you briefly tell us about that?
So if you really look at the long-term impact, I think people would end up leaving more money in their bank account than in their wallets. So I think the bank balances on an average will go up as a conversation. Why that will go up is because the digital acceptance of money will improve. Will improve. People have been pushed in a corner now. They don't have a choice today. So India is a very inventive nation, and we've risen up to all challenges. So they are coming up with ways and adopting to the digital modes of payment now.
Dr. Sinha, again coming to you. When we're talking about digital payments and that developing in India, what do you think will be the next big game changer? Is demonetization going to do, what UPI should have done, for instance, in bringing more people onto the digital channel?
To be honest with you, whenever you are trying to change behavior, especially with something like cash, which is a very fundamental part of your livelihood, it is of course difficult. You need to get trial, you need to get adoption. So it's not straightforward. And so something like demonetization gives you the shock, which requires the whole country to wake up and try and understand and what is this shock. Now, what the the government's intent is, which is actually quite forward-looking, is that what is the exact velocity of money, how much was in storage, and how much of that was tax unaccounted for, and then how much of that is for exchange, and how much for that is in exchange can be shifted to digital channels. Supposing the NPCI could have a wallet, which is for every Jan Dhan account.
Yeah.
And you create this wallet and then you put 500 rupees in it. And you say to people, you learn how to use it, it's yours. Then you start to create digital adoption, because you need to create trial. And the next steps around this are going to be as important as the demonetization action itself.
Okay, I was just getting them to set the background for my next question for you, which is, how have remittance players like you been impacted by demonetization? I mean, how are you changing your strategy in the wake of the note ban that the government has implemented?
So we've already been taking some steps towards that direction, but demonetization itself has obviously had an impact, because in the remote village in the Gopalganj district, if there is no cash and the customer doesn't have a bank account or doesn't have an access to any digital means at this point of time, he's impacted because he would like to withdraw that money in cash, and the last point doesn't have that cash. Luckily for us, we have a tie-up with India Post. And we have an exclusive tie-up with them. India Post, as you know, was one of the entities where cash was available and citizens could go exchange their currency. So that has helped us, and we've been able to honor the requirements of our senders and receivers here. So they've been able to get cash, and we are also using this opportunity to actually educate customers to say, by the way, you can also transfer it directly to your bank account, and instead of waiting in a queue, you can go wherever you want, whenever you want, and withdraw this money.
From a strategy point of view, would the likes of Rajeev be a threat, or how would that play out for you? Niche banks coming into the picture now, more and more players getting into the remittances game.
So we work with banks. And with in fact, I would say it's not really competition. I think there's a lot of scope for collaboration with new kinds of banks coming in.
We were earlier talking about the micro and the macro impact of the whole demonetization exercise also on remittances. Dr. Sinha, coming to you first. On a micro level, what has been the impact, if you could briefly just tell us?
Look,
you spoke about macro earlier, so I'll just bring you back to micro.
You will have to look at that industry specific and region specific. And if you look at India, the north and the east uses cash a bit more than the west and the south. Right. So you would imagine that the north and the east has been hit a bit more. Certain industries, the formal sector would be hit less than the informal sector. In the informal sector, I would imagine that the trade, the logistics, meaning the truckers and the kirana stores, those people might be hit, in the first go.
I wanted to know the impact on remittances industry. This, of course, is the on-ground impact, micro impact. But on the remittances industry, has there been any, have you faced any challenges because of the note ban at all?
Yeah, so fundamentally, see, it's the receiver here. If he's finding it slightly difficult, and earlier he would walk into a location, get a cup of tea, have a nice conversation, take his money and move back. Today he has to stand in a queue. Obviously, he's calling up the sender and telling him, right now don't send, or send a little later, or send a little less money. So yes, there has been an impact in the volumes and in the number of transactions.
Has Fino also faced the same situation? I mean, have you been impacted?
So domestic remittances, the volumes really come to half. It was
halved.
Yeah, so it's cash to account. The guy has to get paid in cash. The person who's paying in cash doesn't have cash, and the whole cycle is broken.
So, where do you really see the whole digital payment ecosystem at the end of this demonetization exercise? How would it have evolved, and give us a scenario?
I think adoption, as we discussed earlier, and is a slightly slower process. It's a question of building that confidence in the system that the money in the account is the same as money in the hand.
Yeah.
Will take some time, but people are already going through the motion. So they know that ATM, that digital money becomes physical money, and that physical money goes and sits in an account and becomes digital money.
Yeah, of course. Dr. Sinha, any thoughts?
So, let's look at it. Where is the problem? There is a problem from person to merchant and from merchant to merchant. Right? That's where the problem is. What are the types of choices you have? If you divide India into those who have smartphones, those who have feature phones, and those who perhaps just have a Jan Dhan account, hopefully with a debit card. And each of these three has different choices. Where you have just a debit card, you need to get a point of sale machine if you want it to shift, right? I mean, it can be a mobile point of sale machine or whatever. If you have a smartphone, you have very different choices. If you've got a feature phone right now, actually the SMS based, the USSD is not working that well, to be very honest with you. So you have to see how you go between these, right? I mean, one of the things we should consider is how can we encourage the adoption of smartphones? What can we do? Because it will really enable a citizen to be able to participate in the digital revolution.
On that note, we'll just quickly take another short break, but we'll be right back, of course, with what impact remittances are having on the socio-economic picture of India. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You are watching Western Union and CNBC TV18's Enabling Financial Inclusion through Efficient Remittances. And Sohini, again, coming to you now. We were talking about remittances' impact on demonetization. But let me shift the picture to the socio-economic impact. You, of course, briefly touched upon it earlier. But to help us understand what the impact is, could you tell us about what the end use of that remittance money is? What is the pattern you've seen across India?
In the Indian context, what we have found is the remittances, the recipient is usually a woman, more likely. And if you look at the overall country, if there is an X percentage of women, and I think roughly 26% of women who hold bank accounts, in the remittance receiving states and in the remittance receiving population, this percentage goes up to about 50%, who is owning and operating a bank account, which I think is pretty empowering in itself, considering financial inclusion.
All right. Rajeev, in your experience so far in the market you operate in, what has been the end use of the money that is remitted? Have you seen that to some extent, helping uplift the socio-economic factor at least?
100%. So the consumption is higher. Once the basic consumption needs are met, the spend on food, education and housing is higher. So they have more disposable income, and which is reflected in the way people spend that money.
Just to summarize all of this, Dr. Sinha, would you say getting $70-odd billion of remittances a year, is that sufficient for, significant socio-economic development of the country?
If you look at the social impact, it depends on the amount of money that's going in and how it's being used. Now, there are a few things that people say that, hey, you use it and then you become a slightly lazy. The recipients, that state becomes a bit lazy in terms of its own entrepreneurship. And the people who do that go outside, and so there is that need to reintegrate and build that up again. But of course, whenever people are going for a better life, and then they are sending money back, it does help the cause,
All right. I just want one final word from all of you. In terms of the suggestions you'd want to make for, better adoption of digital payments, for instance, which should, of course, help remittances also in a large way. Sohini, starting with you.
I think a lot is being done, but fundamentally, from a regulation perspective, I think if there can be more of a level playing field between banks and non-banks, so I think that would go a long way. Like Rajeev was mentioning, there is still the last mile. The customer is still withdrawing money from a banking channel and taking it to another channel and hoping that can convert from digital to physical and back to digital. I think that will create a lot of opportunity and also create healthy competition, which is going to be good for the end customer.
All right, Dr. Sinha?
Well, so the first place to attack right now is the person to merchant. And so we really need to increase the point of sale machines with the merchants. We need to see that the smartphones, can be used as a method of an MPOS to be able to actually make it work. You need to have the NPCI come out with a digital wallet as quickly as possible, so that you can facilitate trade. And so for the merchant to merchant, you really need to allow merchants to come into the tax system with a lower tax rate, with simpler tax forms and with less harassment.
Yeah, so I think a lot has already been done, but what I would say, if technological enablement was one question, mobile number as your UPI ID and ability to enter PIN through USSD on a feature phone.
Through USSDs.
On a feature phone, which is, it's a full transaction you can do on a feature phone, not complicated, just enter your PIN and press enter. I think that will actually, we can you can take it to the next level.
But how many years do you think that would take?
It can happen overnight if banks agree that the registered mobile number of the customer will be used as the UPI ID as default. And NPCI is already working on accepting a PIN on a feature phone.
Yeah.
It just closes the loop. You remember your mobile phone, you remember your bank and the PIN on the mobile. The transaction is seamless. You don't need to invest in any infrastructure at all. Secondly, as Dr. Sana said, about encouraging the merchant to be able to do a digital transaction which is traceable and recordable. You have to reduce the fear there and maybe be more explicit in the measures that you will take. That will really help them, because once the first trader is digital, the second and third and fourth are very easy milestones to achieve.
All right. On that note, we've come to an end for this show. Thank you, Rajeev. Thank you, Dr. Sinha, and thank you, Sohini. That's all we have on the show from the entire team of CNBC. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
Focus, ideate, innovate, enable.